the moment the least black sedan turned off the paved state road onto the gravel track marked by a sagging, hand-painted sign reading Willow Creek Ranch. I knew I'd made a tactical error. The error wasn't in accepting the assignment. My reputation as a corporate restructuring specialist was built on salvaging the unsalvageable, turning red ink into black, and doing so with the surgical precision of a high-stakes accountant. No, the error was in my attire. My custom-tailored dove grey suit, the one I usually wore to address hostile boards of directors in pressurized Manhattan towers, felt utterly ridiculous here. The dust, thick and ochre-colored, immediately coated the gleaming leather of my Italian pumps, rendering them matte and irrevocably country. "We're here, Ms. Vance," the driver, a nervous young man named Kevin, whom I had flown in from Dallas, announced unnecessarily. I stepped out, immediately assaulted by the heat, a dry, oppressive oven bake that smelled of sun-scorched hay, manure, and something vaguely metallic. I am 58 years old, and for the last 35 of those years, my life has been ruled by air conditioning, climate-controlled environments, and the predictable rhythm of quarterly earnings reports. This felt like stepping onto a different planet. Willow Creek Ranch was, to put it mildly, a financial disaster visible to the naked eye. The main barn listed slightly to the east, the paint peeling in strips that looked like sunburnt skin. Fences were haphazardly repaired with twine and prayer. The equipment parked near the silo, rusting tractors and balers, looked less like machinery and more like monuments to deferred maintenance. I pulled the single briefcase containing my preliminary analysis, 300 pages of forensic accounting detailing every mistake made over the last decade, closer to my side. I had been retained by the consortium of banks holding Willow Creek's massive debt. My job was simple: determine if the place was worth liquidating or if a miracle could be performed. Based on the numbers, I was leaning heavily toward liquidation. A man emerged from the shadows of the barn. He wasn't what I expected. Ranchers, in my limited experience derived mostly from old movies and Wall Street jargon, were gruff, elderly, and wore 10-gallon hats. This man was different. He was tall, perhaps 6'3", clad in worn denim and a chambray shirt that hugged broad shoulders. He carried himself with an effortless, coiled energy that was entirely alien to the corporate world. And he was charming. Alarmingly, effortlessly charming. He walked toward me, a wide smile creasing the sun-weathered corners of his eyes. He didn't look 58, or even 50. The file said Wyatt Thorne was 45. He also didn't look like a man staring down the barrel of bankruptcy. "Ms. Vance?" His voice was deep, resonant, and carried the slow, rich drawl of the plains. He extended a hand that was calloused and dusted with fine dirt. I hesitated for a millisecond, then offered my own, cool and manicured hand. "Mr. Thorne, Eleanor Vance." "Wyatt," he corrected smoothly, his grip firm. "Welcome to Willow Creek. I apologize for the dust. We've been meaning to grade this drive for about 6 months now, but, well, you know how it is." I didn't know how it was. In my world, if something needed doing, a timeline was established, a budget allocated, and the task was completed. Excuses were poor collateral. "I understand, Wyatt," I said, my voice crisp and professional, slicing through the warm air. "I'm here to ascertain why the grading of the drive and approximately 3 dozen other crucial maintenance tasks haven't been completed in the last 3 years, despite ample warnings from your creditors." His smile didn't waver, but a flicker of something, defiance, perhaps, or weariness, crossed his face. "You cut straight to the chase, don't you? Let's get you inside. It's hotter than the hinges of hell out here." The ranch house was a rambling 2-story structure that had clearly been beautiful once. Now it was cluttered with the detritus of a busy, disorganized life. Boots by the door, a stack of worn riding gear on a wooden chair, and the faint, comforting smell of fresh coffee mixed with old wood and pet hair. Wyatt gestured toward a large, scarred dining table covered in maps and papers that looked suspiciously like bills. "Can I get you some iced tea, or maybe a coffee? I just brewed a pot." "Iced tea would be appreciated," I replied, setting my briefcase down. The soft thud seemed incredibly loud in the silence. While he moved toward the kitchen, I opened the briefcase. The financial documents, organized in color-coded tabs, were my armor. I pulled out the summary sheet. When he returned, placing a tall glass of tea in front of me, perfectly brewed, annoyingly good, I was already leaning over the figures. Wyatt, I need to be frank. The current operational model is unsustainable. You have maintained a negative cash flow for 7 consecutive quarters. Your debt-to-equity ratio is astronomical, and your yield per acre is 30% below the regional average. On paper, Willow Creek is not just failing, it's terminal. He pulled out a chair opposite me, rotating it backwards so he could lean his arms across the top. He watched me with an unnerving calm. I know the numbers, Eleanor. They've been shoved in my face for 2 years now. Then why have you done nothing to mitigate the bleeding? I've done everything, he countered, his voice losing some of its easy charm, sharpening slightly. I sold the northernmost pasture, I replaced the feed supplier, and I've cut labor costs to the bone. I'm doing the work of 4 men myself. And yet, the numbers reflect a continued descent. Tell me, Wyatt, what is your projected cost of production for the next quarter, assuming a 5% increase in commodity prices? He blinked slowly. I don't know. I can tell you the cows are healthy, though. We just finished branding the new calves. They're strong. That's what matters. I sighed, pinching the bridge of my nose. This was the fundamental problem with non-corporate clients, the insistence on prioritizing intuition and sentiment over verifiable data. Wyatt, the health of the cattle is irrelevant if you cannot finance the feed or the veterinary care. You cannot run a business on sentiment. You run it on spreadsheets. You run a bank on spreadsheets, Eleanor. You run a ranch on the land. On instinct. I know when a storm is coming before the weather report does. I know when the market is going to dip because I watch the patterns of the herd. That's not in your quarterly report, is it? No, I admitted dryly. The cyclical movement of cattle herds is not an accepted metric for solvency on Wall Street. Maybe that's why Wall Street keeps crashing, he muttered. The tension in the room thickened, palpable and charged, but oddly stimulating. I hadn't had a truly challenging negotiation in months. Most CEOs folded immediately under the weight of my data. Wyatt Thorne was proving resilient, if utterly illogical. Let's walk the property, I proposed, pushing the spreadsheets aside. I need to see the tangible assets, not just the abstract liabilities. Sure, he said, rising. But you might want to change shoes. I looked down at my expensive leather pumps, now thoroughly ruined. I had no other shoes. I hadn't packed for the wilderness. I had packed for a board meeting. I'll manage, I said stiffly. The next 2 hours were a masterclass in controlled frustration. Wyatt led me through fields of grazing cattle, beautiful, placid creatures that seemed utterly oblivious to the financial ruin they represented. He pointed out the new water pump he'd installed, paid for with an emergency loan I'd flagged as reckless spending, and the renovated stables. He spoke about the land with a fierce, proprietary love. He talked about the history of the ranch, how his great-grandfather had settled here, how every tree and stream held a story. I filtered his passion through my lens of efficiency. The south pasture fence is down in 5 places. That's a potential liability for straying cattle and a massive insurance risk, I observed, pointing out the obvious. We just haven't had the hands to fix it. We lost Jim last month, and I can't afford to hire a replacement. Then you should have outsourced the fencing project. The cost of outsourcing is less than the cost of losing a prize bull. Outsourcing doesn't understand this land, Eleanor. It takes a local to know where the water runoff will affect the posts in the spring. He argued, stopping near a small winding creek. He paused and turned to me, his expression softening slightly. Look, I know you see me as a spreadsheet error, a bad investment. But this isn't a company. It's a living thing. You can't just cut the fat. You have to understand the ecosystem. Ecosystems are complex, Wyatt, but the rules of thermodynamics are not. Input must exceed output. Your input of capital and labor is disproportionate to your output of profit. You are losing energy. He didn't argue the physics. He simply knelt by the creek bank. He reached into the water and pulled out a small, smooth grey stone, turning it over in his hand. How long since you've touched something real, Eleanor? Something that wasn't glass or paper or plastic? The question caught me off guard. My daily routine was an insulated bubble of high thread count cotton, sterile office surfaces, and digital screens. My connection to reality is defined by measurable impact, Wyatt, not by rocks, I retorted, though I felt a strange heat rise in my cheeks. He stood up, towering over me slightly. The sun hit his profile, illuminating the fine lines around his eyes and the slight stubble on his jaw. He was undeniably rugged, and for the briefest, most unprofessional moment, I felt a tremor of something non-numerical. Attraction? No. Disorientation, certainly. Look, I'll show you the ledgers, he conceded, seeing the resolute logic in my eyes. But I need you to promise me something. I promise only to deliver a fair and objective analysis. No, he insisted. Promise me that before you write the final report, the one that decides if my family legacy burns or survives, you'll put down the spreadsheets and actually listen to the ranch. You have to trade the suit for the soil, even just for a moment. I looked down at my ruined shoes, then back at the man who was asking me to abandon the very methodology that had made me the most feared and respected restructuring consultant in the country. That's outside the scope of my contract, Wyatt. Maybe it's outside the scope of your life, Eleanor, he countered, his gaze challenging. But if you don't understand the heart of this place, you'll never understand why the numbers are failing. You'll just be calculating the death certificate. The weight of his words settled on me. He wasn't just talking about a business. He was talking about a life. A messy, chaotic, deeply rooted life that defied all my neat columns and rows. Very well, I said, conceding the first minor battle. Show me the books. Then perhaps you can show me how to listen to the soil. We returned to the house, the afternoon sun beginning its slow descent, painting the dusty fields in hues of gold and rust. The books were exactly as disorganized as I feared. Wyatt, it turned out, was a brilliant rancher and a terrible administrator. Receipts were shoved into shoeboxes, invoices were scattered, and the entire system relied on a decade-old desktop computer running obsolete software. I spent the next 3 hours immersed in the chaos, my fingers flying across the laptop keyboard as I began migrating his handwritten chicken scratch notes into structured financial models. Wyatt sat across from me, occasionally offering insight that was maddeningly anecdotal, but sometimes surprisingly astute. Did you account for the replacement of the feed storage silo in 2018? I asked, scrolling through a list of capital expenditures. No, that was a barter trade. We swapped a dozen head of cattle with the Miller Ranch down the road for the labor and materials. A barter trade? Wyatt, you cannot record a major fixed asset replacement as a non-cash transaction in the books without proper valuation and documentation. It felt proper at the time. He shrugged, entirely unconcerned with GAAP standards. Feeling is not a recognized accounting principle, I snapped, rubbing my temples. The sheer volume of undocumented transactions and operational inefficiencies was staggering. This wasn't just poor management, it was an active rejection of formalized structure. By the time the shadows stretched long across the room, I was exhausted. My suit was clinging to me, wrinkled and dirty, and my brain was throbbing with the sheer density of the raw, unrefined data. I need to stop, I announced, snapping my laptop shut. I need a shower and a quiet space to process this initial data dump. Wyatt looked genuinely concerned. Of course. I should have offered sooner. I only have the one guest room, but it's clean. I'll get you some towels. Thank you. And Wyatt? He turned back from the doorway. In the future, any transaction over $1,000 requires a signed, dated invoice, not a handshake and a promise. He gave me that easy, infuriating smile again. Duly noted, Eleanor. Now, about dinner. I was planning to grill some steaks. You're welcome to join. Dinner. A social invitation. I hadn't eaten dinner with a client outside of a formal, high-powered restaurant in years. I appreciate the offer, but I have several hours of analysis to conduct tonight. A protein bar will suffice. Nonsense, he said, stepping closer. You look like you're about to collapse. Besides, you can't save the ranch if you starve the consultant. And you need to taste what you're trying to save. This is one of our own steers. It's the best beef in the county. He smelled faintly of wood smoke and clean soap, a stark contrast to the dust and sweat from earlier. He was persistent, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself considering abandoning my schedule for something purely pleasurable. 1 hour, I conceded, feeling the first small crack in my professional facade. And I need to borrow some clothes. My wardrobe is ill-suited for a barbecue. Wyatt's grin widened, genuine and warm. I think I can find something suitable for you, Eleanor. Something that won't mind a little dirt. I watched him walk away, feeling a curious mix of annoyance and anticipation. I had come here to perform an execution. Instead, I found myself accepting the hospitality of the man I was supposed to be dismantling, preparing to eat the very product I was tasked with valuing. The process of stepping out of my suit was a physical relief. The guest room was simple: a sturdy wooden bed, a handmade quilt, and a window overlooking a dusty paddock where a few horses were grazing peacefully. The bathroom was spotless. When I emerged, refreshed, I found a stack of clothes placed neatly on the bed. A clean, soft flannel shirt, definitely Wyatt's, smelling faintly of him, and a pair of sturdy broken-in jeans that looked like they might actually fit. I put on the clothes. The flannel was enormous, swallowing my shoulders, but the denim felt sturdy and comforting. I rolled the cuffs of the jeans and the sleeves of the shirt, looking in the small mirror. The woman looking back at me was still Eleanor Vance, but she was softer, less armored. The grey executive was temporarily replaced by a borrowed persona. I walked toward the kitchen, feeling strangely liberated by the lack of structure. Wyatt was standing outside on a small wooden porch, tending a large, smoking grill. The aroma of searing meat was intoxicating. He turned as I approached, and his eyes lingered on me for a moment. "Now that," he said, his voice low, "is more fitting for Willow Creek." "Don't get used to it," I warned, adjusting the collar of his shirt. "I'll be back in my armor tomorrow." "We'll see," he murmured, flipping a massive cut of steak. "Have a seat. Tell me, Eleanor Vance, what do you do for fun when you aren't terrorizing insolvent ranchers?" I sat down, surprised by the personal question. I don't terrorize anyone. I perform necessary triage, and fun is usually defined by reading complex economic theory or attending the opera. He chuckled, a rich, genuine sound. "Sounds exhausting. When was the last time you watched the sunset?" I paused. "I can see the sunset perfectly well from my penthouse apartment in Chicago." "That's filtered light through glass and smog. I mean this." He gestured toward the horizon. The sun was sinking, a spectacular, violent burst of orange and crimson bleeding into the purple twilight. The vast, uninterrupted sky was overwhelming in its beauty. "It's impressive," I conceded grudgingly. "It's real," he corrected. He plated the steaks, thick and perfectly charred, adding a simple salad and a baked potato. "Eat, and tell me what your gut says about Willow Creek, not your spreadsheets." I took a bite of the steak. It was phenomenal, tender, rich, and utterly luxurious. The best I had ever tasted. I looked at Wyatt, the man who was bankrupting himself to maintain this quality, this life, this connection to the land. "My gut," I admitted, chewing slowly, "says that this beef is worth saving. My spreadsheets, however, still say you're insolvent." He smiled. "Then we have all night to teach the spreadsheets how to listen to the gut." The night deepened around us. We ate, not talking about finances, but about the strange realities of our lives. His relentless physical labor, my relentless intellectual warfare. He talked about the satisfaction of delivering a calf. I talked about the exhilaration of closing a multi-billion-dollar deal. Two entirely different worlds, separated by 90 miles of dirt road and a chasm of philosophy. As we finished dinner, the stars began to emerge, vast and brilliant in the unpolluted darkness. "You should see the sky through a telescope," I mused. "The mathematics of the cosmos are astonishing." Wyatt simply leaned back, gazing up. "I prefer the romance of the naked eye. It makes you feel small, but connected." "Connected to what?" "To everything, Eleanor. To the chaos and the order. To the fact that sometimes the best decision isn't the one you calculate, but the one you feel." I felt a sudden sharp urge to calculate him, to break down his charm, his defiance, his easy confidence into quantifiable metrics. But he was too complex, too wild. "I need to work, Wyatt," I said, abruptly standing up, pulling the borrowed flannel around me like a shield. I know. But one more thing before you retreat to the numbers. He led me away from the porch, across the yard toward the fence line. The air was cool now, carrying the scent of night-blooming jasmine. Listen, he whispered. I listened. I heard the chirping of crickets, the distant howl of a coyote, and the soft, rhythmic breathing of the sleeping cattle. They sound safe, I observed. They are, he agreed, because I listen to them. I don't just count them. You want to save this place? Stop treating it like a dead corporation. Treat it like a herd. Find the weak ones, yes, but nurture the strong ones. And trust your instincts when the sun comes up. He turned to me, and the moonlight caught his eyes, dark, intense, and utterly serious. He wasn't just talking about the ranch anymore. Good night, Eleanor Vance, he said softly. I mumbled a reply and retreated quickly to the house, my heart beating a rhythm that was entirely too fast for a woman who prided herself on being unflappable. I sat down at the table, opened my laptop, and stared at the spreadsheets. Insolvency, liquidation, negative cash flow. But beneath the cold, hard data, I could still feel the warmth of the flannel shirt, the taste of the perfect steak, and the overwhelming silence of the sleeping ranch. I had come here to save a business, but I had a sudden terrifying realization. Wyatt Thorne was trying to save me. Narrator note to audience: if you're enjoying Eleanor's journey, from the boardroom to the barn, hit the like button and subscribe for part 2. What do you think Wyatt will teach Eleanor next? Let me know in the comments below. I woke before dawn, the silence oppressive yet strangely comforting. The flannel shirt still lay on the chair, a soft, tangible reminder of the night's truce. I slipped out of it and into the cold, structured confines of my grey suit. The fabric felt stiff, reliable, and entirely right. I needed my armor. I spent the hours before sunrise staring at the glowing screen of my laptop. I ran every scenario: aggressive liquidation, Chapter 11 reorganization, even a highly leveraged expansion model based on external investment. Every calculation led back to the same conclusion: Willow Creek could not survive in its current form. Wyatt's romantic adherence to tradition and instinct was mathematically fatal. When I finally heard the sounds of movement, the distant lowing of cattle, the squeak of a screen door, I was already dressed, coiffed, and ready for battle. Wyatt found me at the dining table, the spreadsheets spread out like casualty reports. He was wearing fresh jeans and a darker blue shirt, his hair still damp from a quick shower. He carried 2 mugs of coffee. Morning, Eleanor, he said, placing one mug in front of me. You look like you wrestled a data center and lost. I look like I performed a forensic autopsy, I corrected, taking a sip. The coffee was strong, dark, and exactly what I needed. I found enough undocumented transactions to justify calling the SEC if you were a publicly traded company. He leaned against the table, unperturbed. We trade in cattle, not stocks, and we value honesty over paperwork. Did you sleep? Sufficiently. Wyatt, we need to talk about the debt structure. You have balloon payments coming due in Q3 that you simply cannot meet. We need immediate, drastic cuts. I'm ready for the conversation, he said, but he didn't sit down. But you promised me something last night. You promised to listen to the ranch before you delivered the final verdict. And you can't listen from behind a screen. I frowned. I'm a consultant, not a volunteer field hand. My value is in analysis, not manual labor. Your analysis is based on assumptions from a world that doesn't have dirt under its fingernails. You need context, Eleanor. You need to understand where the losses are happening, not just that they exist. He pushed off the table. Come on. We're going to fix the south pasture fence. I stared down at my grey suit, my Italian pump still visibly scarred from yesterday's walk. Wyatt, I can't. You can, he interrupted, his voice firm, lacking the usual easy charm. This was the rancher, the man responsible for the land. Talking now. I found a pair of old work boots in the mudroom. They might be a size too big, but they'll keep the snakes out. And you're still wearing my shirt? So, I know you aren't completely allergic to manual labor. The reminder of the flannel shirt was a sly tactical move. I felt a flash of irritation, quickly followed by the realization that if I refused, I would lose the moral high ground. He was challenging my rigor, implying I was afraid of reality. Fine, I clipped out, snapping my laptop shut. But I expect to see the full Q1 projections immediately upon our return. The boots were heavy, laced high, and smelled faintly of leather and old hay. They felt clumsy, but grounding. Wyatt had also produced a wide-brimmed straw hat to replace my useless sunglasses. Stepping into the sunlight felt different this morning. It wasn't just heat, it was energy. We drove out to the south pasture in a battered, dusty pickup truck. The air conditioning was non-existent, and the ride was jarring, but I focused on mapping the landscape against my mental image of the ranch's boundaries. The fence line was indeed a disaster. Thick, barbed wire lay tangled on the ground. Posts were snapped, and a few stray cows were grazing dangerously close to the boundary road. "This is a critical failure point, Wyatt," I stated, pulling out my phone to take a photo of the damage. "Evidence for my report?" "It is, and it's a perfect example of why the numbers fail to tell the story," he said, pulling a coil of new wire and a post driver from the back of the truck. "We lost Jim, my best hand, because I had to cut his salary to pay the property taxes. Jim was the only one who knew how to use the post driver efficiently." He handed me a pair of thick leather gloves. "You're on wire duty. We need to untangle this old mess and stretch the new wire tight. Hold it taut while I hammer the posts." The work was brutal. The gloves were stiff, and the barbed wire was heavy and unforgiving. My hands, accustomed only to signing documents and typing, quickly protested. The sun beat down, turning the flannel shirt into a steam room. Wyatt, meanwhile, was a study in graceful power. He positioned a new cedar post, raised the heavy steel driver above his head, and brought it down with a rhythmic pounding force that shook the ground. Every movement was efficient, economical, and powerful. He barely seemed to sweat. I struggled with a particularly snarled section of rusted wire. It snagged on a thorny bush, and when I pulled too hard, the sharp barbs bit through the leather glove and sliced my forearm. I let out a sharp, involuntary gasp. Wyatt stopped hammering instantly. "Eleanor!" He dropped the driver and was at my side in a flash, his large hands gently pulling the glove away. A thin bead of bright red blood welled up on my skin. "It's fine," I muttered, pulling my arm away. "A minor abrasion. It's a nasty scratch. We need to clean that." He pulled a bandana from his back pocket and pressed it firmly onto the cut. His proximity was immediate and overwhelming. The scent of wood smoke, sweat, and clean leather filled my senses. "You're rushing," he observed, his eyes serious as he examined the wound. "You're treating the fence like a quarterly deadline. You can't rush the wire, or it fights back. You have to work with it." "I don't work with things, Wyatt. I manage them." He shook his head slowly. "That's the difference. Out here, you partner with the world. You don't conquer it. You feel the tension of the wire, you listen to the resistance, and you adjust your approach. Look." He took the end of the wire I had been fighting. Instead of yanking, he used a slow, rotational movement, easing the wire out of the thorny grasp of the bush, his movements deliberate and patient. "Patience, Eleanor. It's not in the budget, but it's essential for survival." We worked together for the next hour, the rhythm of his hammering and my steadying of the wire creating a strange, shared intimacy. My suit jacket was long, gone, draped over the truck seat, and the collar of the flannel was soaked. I felt the burn in my shoulders and the unfamiliar ache of using muscles that had been dormant for decades. I was filthy, exhausted, and strangely exhilarated. I had accomplished something tangible that day, something that couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. We paused for water under the shade of a lone cottonwood tree. I leaned back against the rough bark, breathing hard. "So," Wyatt said, taking a long drink, "did you calculate the ROI on that hour of labor?" "My internal calculator suggests the ROI is negative, considering the cost of the suit cleaning and potential medical expenses," I replied, managing a tired smile. But I understand the inefficiency better now. It's a labor-intensive operation, and you are understaffed. Exactly. And if I hire more hands, the operational costs jump and the banks get twitchy. If I don't, the ranch degrades and the banks still get twitchy. He sighed, running a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. It's a damned cycle. Then we have to find a way to make the labor more efficient or the output more valuable. I mused, looking out at the grazing cattle. They were beautiful, high-quality animals. The problem isn't the product, it's the pathway to market. Wyatt looked at me, a flicker of genuine respect in his eyes. Now you're talking like a partner, not an executioner. The word partner settled heavily in the air between us. It wasn't about business anymore. I stood up, needing to break the sudden intensity. I need to clean up and analyze the market trends for premium grass-fed beef. If your product is truly superior, we might be able to justify a higher price point through direct-to-consumer sales, bypassing the commodity market. That requires branding, marketing, and a massive investment in logistics, he countered. It requires risk, I corrected, but it's the only path forward that doesn't involve selling off the heart of the ranch. He watched me, his expression softening again. You're starting to care, Eleanor Vance. I care about solving the equation, Wyatt. It's a complex problem, and I thrive on complexity. I was lying, or at least simplifying. I cared because he cared. I cared because the silence of the land had seeped into my carefully constructed walls. Narrator note to audience. Eleanor is trading her spreadsheets for sweat. If you're enjoying this clash of logic and passion, let me know in the comments. What city are you tuning in from? And how would you rate the story so far? 0 to 10. Your support keeps Willow Creek alive. Gawk speechless. Back at the house, I stripped off the ruined suit and stood under the cool spray of the shower, washing away the ochre dust and the sweat. The flannel shirt felt like a second skin now. I was starting to understand why Wyatt lived in denim and cotton. It was honest clothing. The afternoon was dedicated to a deep dive into the logistics of direct-to-consumer sales. I discovered that Wyatt had been selling his prize beef through a low-margin local distributor, losing a huge percentage of the potential profit. This is insane, Wyatt, I said, slamming a printout onto the table. You are producing 5-star quality beef and selling it for 2-star prices. The distributor is family friends, he explained, looking vaguely uncomfortable. I didn't want to rock the boat. You are drowning the ranch to avoid rocking the boat. Family friends do not factor into a solvency model. My voice was sharp, professional frustration overriding my physical exhaustion. We are going to immediately terminate that contract and initiate a full rebranding and direct sales campaign. We target high-end restaurants and specialty butchers in major metropolitan areas. Wyatt pushed his chair back. Eleanor, I don't know how to run a marketing campaign. I know how to raise the best damn cattle in Texas. I don't do social media or logistics planning. I do, I stated simply. I restructured the entire sales division of a multinational tech firm last year. This is small potatoes compared to that. I will build the structure, you provide the product and the story. The story? Yes. The passion. The land. The history. That's what people pay a premium for. They don't want a commodity. They want authenticity. You are the authenticity, Wyatt. He looked skeptical, but intrigued. So, you're saying we pivot the entire operation based on my ability to wax poetic about a cow? I'm saying we utilize your intrinsic value, which is currently undocumented and undervalued, I corrected. But to do that, we need capital. We need to present a plan to the banks that shows immediate quantifiable change and a realistic path to profitability within 18 months. We worked late into the night again, but this time, the dynamic had shifted. It was no longer a negotiation. It was a collaboration. He taught me the complex genetics of his herd. I taught him how to structure a professional business proposal. Around midnight, my laptop battery warning flashed red. I need the charger, I sighed, rubbing my eyes. It's in my briefcase, by the door. Wyatt retrieved the charger and knelt by the wall socket to plug it in. As he did, he paused, looking at the floorboards. You know, I haven't had someone sit here and work this hard to save this place since my father was alive, he murmured, his voice low. I'm working this hard because I hate to see inefficiency, Wyatt, and I hate to lose, I replied, trying to maintain the professional distance. But my voice was softer than I intended. He looked up at me, his eyes catching the lamplight. He was still kneeling, placing him at a vulnerable, slightly lower level. It's more than that, Eleanor. You're fighting for it. You could have walked in, signed the death certificate, and been back in Chicago yesterday. Why didn't you? I didn't have a ready answer. The truth was messy and non-numerical. The truth was the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the way he moved with unhurried strength, the way he had gently cleaned the scratch on my arm. Because, I finally said, leaning forward slightly, I realize that the numbers aren't the only things that matter. I need to quantify the unquantifiable to prove to the banks that this ranch has soul. He stood up then, slowly, bridging the distance between us. We were close enough now that I had to tilt my head back slightly to meet his gaze. And what's the quantifiable metric for soul, Eleanor? He asked, his voice a low rumble. I haven't found it yet, I admitted, feeling a dangerous warmth spread through me. But I'm looking. His hand lifted, slow and deliberate, and gently brushed a strand of hair that had escaped my professional bun, tucking it behind my ear. His fingers, calloused and strong, barely grazed my skin, but the sensation was electric, shattering the last vestiges of my executive composure. Let me know when you calculate it, he whispered. The air thrummed with unspoken possibilities, the kind of tension that exists just before a major market correction, unpredictable, inevitable, and potentially catastrophic to my highly ordered life. I stepped back, the movement purely defensive. I need to finish this model. I need to present the Q1 projections by morning. He nodded, the professional rancher mask settling back into place, though his eyes held a lingering heat. Right, projections. I'll make sure the coffee stays hot. The moment was gone, but the reverberations remained. I worked until the first faint light of morning painted the sky. When I finally finished the revised financial model, the Willow Creek reinvestment proposal, it was aggressive, risky, but viable. It relied entirely on Wyatt's commitment to quality and my ability to navigate the high-end market. I had traded the liquidation model for the survival model. I had chosen risk over certainty. When Wyatt returned, carrying a tray with breakfast, scrambled eggs, thick-cut bacon, and fresh biscuits, I presented the final document. This is it, Wyatt, I said, sliding the printed proposal across the table. This is the only path. We need to restructure the debt, secure short-term operational capital, and immediately implement the direct-to-consumer sales model. The banks will hate the risk, but they'll love the projected revenue increase. He sat down and read the summary page, his brow furrowed in concentration. It means changing everything about how I operate, he observed. It means adapting to survive. You keep the land, you keep the cattle, but you change the ledger. We need to start immediately. I need access to your bank accounts, your legal counsel, and I need you to trust my judgment entirely for the next 6 months. He looked up from the paper, meeting my gaze. His eyes were clear, honest, and filled with a weighty decision. I trust your judgment, Eleanor Vance, he said finally. But I need you to trust mine too. Today, you start learning to ride. If you're going to run the business, you need to know what a good saddle feels like. I glanced down at my suit, now permanently wrinkled and dirt-stained. I think my insurance policy has a clause against equestrian activities. Then we'll get you new insurance, he countered, a familiar, challenging smile playing on his lips. You learned how to listen to the soil. Now you need to learn the language of the herd. And that happens from the back of a horse, not from behind a desk. I looked at the proposal, the culmination of 35 years of professional discipline, then out the window at the endless, inviting expanse of the ranch. The choice was clear. The numbers were done. Now, the education began. All right, Wyatt, I said, a slow, unfamiliar sense of excitement bubbling up inside me. Show me the horses. He grinned, a flash of pure, unadulterated triumph that had nothing to do with spreadsheets. Come on, city girl. Let's get you acquainted with your new office chair. He led me to the stables, a structure that, unlike the main barn, was immaculate and clearly the recipient of consistent care. The air inside smelled of hay, leather, and the unique warm scent of large, well-cared-for animals. He introduced me to a mare named Star. She was a gentle, aging quarter horse, placid and sturdy. "She's sensible," Wyatt explained, running a comforting hand along her flank. "She won't spook easily, but you still have to earn her trust." I watched him saddle her. The leather was thick, worn smooth in places, and the process was a complex ballet of straps, buckles, and gentle verbal cues. I stood there, still in my rumpled, dirt-stained grey suit, feeling utterly useless. "First lesson. They feel your tension," Wyatt murmured, tightening the cinch. "If you're nervous, they know. If you're trying to control them with force, they resist. You have to breathe with them." "I control multi-million-dollar corporations by exerting force, Wyatt," I retorted, folding my arms. "It's highly effective." "A corporation doesn't have a soul, Eleanor. Star does, and she outweighs you by 1,000 pounds. You need respect, not leverage." The process of mounting Star was profoundly humiliating. My legs, stiff from years of sitting at board tables, protested violently. The saddle felt impossibly high. Wyatt had to physically guide my foot into the stirrup, his hand resting firmly on my thigh as he instructed me to swing my leg over. "Easy, easy," he coached, his breath warm against my ear as he steadied me. Finally seated, I gripped the horn of the saddle like a lifeline, my knuckles white. Star shifted beneath me, a massive, muscular presence, and I felt a wave of pure, primal fear. "Don't grip the horn," Wyatt instructed, standing beside me, holding the reins loosely. "Relax your shoulders. Let your weight sink into the saddle. You're fighting gravity and the horse." "I'm fighting the urge to liquidate this entire experience," I muttered, trying to unclench my jaw. He chuckled, a deep, rolling sound. "I know. But you promised to trust the instinct. The only instinct you need right now is balance. Look straight ahead, Eleanor. Don't look down." He taught me the basics of the reins. Not pulling, but guiding. He taught me how to shift my weight to signal a turn. It was a language of subtlety, entirely foreign to my world of blunt directives and quantifiable results. We moved into the paddock. Wyatt was mounted on a large, muscular gelding, moving with an effortless grace that seemed unfair. He kept a patient pace beside me, occasionally reaching over to adjust my posture. "If you want her to go, you press with your heels but gently. You ask, you don't demand." "Ask," I repeated, trying to implement the subtle pressure. Star responded instantly, moving forward at a slow walk. It was exhilarating, a sudden powerful sense of shared momentum. "See?" Wyatt smiled. "She trusted your ask." But the moment of triumph was short-lived. Star suddenly stopped near the fence to nibble at a patch of clover. I hadn't anticipated the halt and lurched forward, nearly losing my seat. "No, Star," I snapped, pulling back on the reins. Star responded by shaking her head and stomping her foot, clearly annoyed. "Whoa, whoa." Wyatt rode closer, instantly calming the mare with a soothing word and a gentle touch on her neck. "Remember what I said? Tension. You got frustrated and she felt it. You pulled too hard. You have to be patient with the process, Eleanor. It's not a machine. It's a partnership." He dismounted and walked over to me, placing one hand over mine on the reins. "Try again. Loose grip. Soft hands. Ask with intention, but without anger." His hand was warm and rough over my smooth, cool skin. The contrast was startling. The juxtaposition of our lives made physical. I focused entirely on the pressure of his touch, trying to channel his steady calm. I exhaled slowly, relaxed my grip, and gently pressed my heels. Star lifted her head, paused, and then obediently stepped away from the fence. "There you go," Wyatt whispered, his voice full of pride. He stayed there for a moment longer than necessary, his hand covering mine, his eyes locked on mine. The sun was high, the dust motes dancing in the light, and for the first time, I wasn't thinking about the debt ratio or the Q3 projections. I was simply focused on the exquisite, terrifying feeling of connection. To the horse, and to the man guiding me. I spent the rest of the morning learning to trot, a jarring, bouncy experience that left my core muscles screaming in protest. I realized that my highly disciplined life of gym trainers and spinning classes had prepared me for absolutely nothing in the real world. When we finally returned to the barn, I slid off Star's back, my legs trembling. I think I just identified a new liability on the books, I gasped, leaning heavily on the saddle. My entire lower body. Wyatt laughed, a loud, joyful sound, and caught my elbow as I swayed. You did great, Eleanor. You didn't quit. Most people quit the first time they lose their rhythm. I don't quit, I affirmed, straightening up, despite the pain. Now, back to the numbers. The bank meeting is next week. We need the final pitch deck. The afternoon was a whirlwind of collaboration that felt remarkably productive. My body ached, but my mind was sharp, fueled by the physical exertion and the adrenaline of the morning. We sat at the dining table, the spreadsheets now coexisting with maps of the ranch and samples of potential packaging designs for the Willow Creek Premium Reserve line. I worked the data, creating compelling visuals of the projected 400% increase in profit margin by cutting out the middleman and targeting the luxury market. Wyatt worked the narrative, providing authentic, detailed history and imagery. We need photos of the ranch, I instructed, scrolling through stock images of cattle. But not this generic junk. We need photos of your hands working the earth. We need the authenticity you embody. He looked uncomfortable. I don't know about being the face of the brand, Eleanor. You are the brand, Wyatt. You are the intangible asset the banks haven't accounted for. You represent the integrity and the quality. We sell the story of the man who chose the land over the ledger. He looked at the projected growth curve on my screen, then at the photo I'd taken of his hand covered in dust, gently holding the smooth grey creek stone. So, my instinct is finally quantifiable, he mused. It's being leveraged, I corrected, softening my tone. It's a risk, but it's a calculated risk. We are selling the opposite of corporate farming. We designed a sleek professional proposal that was half rigorous financial modeling and half passionate manifesto. It was, arguably, the most creatively satisfying project of my career. It required logic and heart. As the sun set, we paused. We were both exhausted, covered in ink and dust, but the proposal was complete. We did it, I breathed, leaning back in my chair, feeling the deep satisfaction of a complex problem solved. Wyatt reached across the table and covered my hand with his, a simple, spontaneous gesture that sent a jolt through me. We did, partner, he confirmed. The word hung there again, weighty and intimate. I should go shower, I murmured, pulling my hand away gently. I need to fly to Dallas tomorrow morning to present this to the lead investor. You're leaving? He asked, the warmth in his eyes dimming slightly. For 2 days. I need to make the pitch in person. No one says no to Eleanor Vance when she's standing in their boardroom. You won't be wearing the suit, will you? He challenged, a slight smile returning. I looked down at the ruined grey fabric. I'll be wearing a new one, but I think I'll pack the flannel shirt. He chuckled. Good. Just remember the feeling of the saddle when you're facing the numbers. The meeting in Dallas was exactly the high-stakes, air-conditioned theatre I was accustomed to. I walked into the mahogany-panelled boardroom, my new charcoal suit crisp, my presentation flawless. I delivered the financial analysis with surgical precision, dissecting the current inefficiencies and presenting the aggressive, data-driven pivot to premium direct sales. The investors, all men in expensive dark suits, listened with the skepticism I expected. Mr. Thorne's track record is abysmal, Ms. Vance, the lead investor, Mr. Sterling, stated dryly, tapping a pen on the table. Why should we trust that he can manage a sophisticated direct-to-consumer logistics chain when he can't even manage his receipts? Because Mr. Thorne won't be managing the logistics chain, I countered smoothly. I will. I have structured a 6-month operational contract that puts me in charge of the entire sales and marketing division, reporting directly to a newly formed operational board. Mr. Thorne will focus entirely on what he does best, producing the highest quality, authentic product. I paused, leaning forward slightly, letting my conviction fill the room. Gentlemen, you have 2 choices. You can liquidate Willow Creek now and recover pennies on the dollar, destroying a valuable legacy, and settling for mediocrity. Or you can invest the required capital, a calculated risk, and partner with a unique asset that promises exponential returns in the rapidly growing premium food sector. You are not investing in cattle. You are investing in authenticity. And I am guaranteeing the structure. I spoke not just about the numbers, but about the story, Wyatt's commitment, the land, the superior genetics of the herd. I used the language of passion I had learned on the ranch, married to the language of profit I had mastered in the city. It worked. They didn't fall in love with the ranch, but they fell in love with the projected ROI and the promise of my rigor. They approved the short-term capital infusion and the 6-month trial period. Willow Creek was saved, at least temporarily. I flew back late that evening, exhausted but triumphant. When I arrived back at the ranch, the darkness was absolute. I walked toward the house, the silence broken only by the crunch of my tires on the gravel. Wyatt was waiting on the porch, a silhouette against the dim light spilling from the doorway. "Well?" he asked, his voice anxious. I didn't answer immediately. I walked up the steps, set my briefcase down, and looked at him. The smell of the night, dust, hay, and cool air was intoxicating. "They approved the proposal," I said, letting the words settle. "We have operational capital and a 6-month window to prove the model." Wyatt let out a long, slow breath, running a hand over his face. The tension left his body in a visible wave. "Thank God. Eleanor, I don't know how to thank you." "You can start by following my directives precisely," I said, trying to inject my usual professional sternness, but it felt hollow. He stepped closer, closing the small gap between us. His eyes were shining in the faint light. "You saved us." "I saved a balance sheet," I corrected, but the words were weak. "No," he insisted, reaching out and gently touching my shoulder, his fingers heavy and warm. "You saved more than that. You fought for the heart of this place, Eleanor. You chose to believe in something that wasn't quantifiable." I felt the familiar, dangerous tremor of attraction ripple through me. I was still Eleanor Vance, the cold, pragmatic executive, but the woman inside the suit was melting under his gaze. "I chose the higher ROI," I lied, my voice barely a whisper. He shook his head, a slow, knowing smile spreading across his face. "You chose the risk, and I know why." He didn't give me a chance to argue. His other hand lifted, cupping the back of my neck, and he lowered his head. The kiss was nothing like a calculated risk. It was immediate, overwhelming certainty. The rough stubble of his jaws scraped my smooth skin, and the scent of him, clean, earthy, Wyatt, filled my senses. His mouth was soft but insistent, a stark contrast to the strength of his hands. All the tension I had carried for the past 3 days, the board meeting, the flight, the fear of failure, dissipated into the single shared moment. I leaned into him, letting the heavy weight of my corporate armor fall away. My hands went up, finding the soft chambray of his shirt, pulling him closer. This was not a transaction. This was a necessity. This was the unquantifiable metric of soul I had been searching for. When we finally drew back, breathless, the silence of the ranch seemed to hold its breath around us. "That," he murmured, his voice husky, his forehead resting against mine, "was highly effective." I managed a shaky laugh. "I think we just introduced a severe conflict of interest into the operational contract." "I think," he countered, pulling me gently into the crook of his arm, leading me toward the front door, "that we just created a partnership worth fighting for." The next few days were a blur of intense work and profound connection. We formalized the business plan, hired a small, dedicated logistics team, and began the branding process. My suit remained in the closet, replaced by the borrowed flannel and sturdy denim. My body adjusted to the pain of riding, and I began to understand the subtle language of Star. I wasn't just sitting on her back, I was moving with her. Wyatt and I fell into an easy, intimate rhythm. We worked side by side all day, discussing marketing funnels and feed costs. We shared simple, delicious dinners that he cooked, and we talked about everything and nothing. His childhood on the ranch, my ambition in the city, the things we had sacrificed for our respective careers. One evening, after a particularly successful day of finalizing the packaging designs, we found ourselves outside again, leaning against the fence, watching the stars. I used to think that the universe was best understood through astrophysics and formulas, I confessed, gazing up at the Milky Way. Now, I look up and I just feel small and happy to be small. Wyatt turned his head, his profile sharp against the starlight. The universe is the ultimate paradox, Eleanor. It's infinite, but it's entirely personal. It's chaos, but it follows perfect, beautiful rules. Like the ranch, I concluded. Chaos, but with a deep, underlying order. He reached for my hand, interlacing our fingers. His palm was rough, mine smooth. We're the paradox, Eleanor. The logic and the chaos, the suit and the soil. I turned to him, feeling a wave of deep, settled affection that was far more comforting than any professional achievement. I haven't worn my suit in 4 days, I noted, surprised by the realization. I noticed, he smiled. It looks much better on the hanger. We stayed out under the stars until the air grew cold, his arm draped around my shoulders, his presence a solid grounding weight. The transformation was happening faster than any model could predict. I was trading my calculated certainty for the thrilling uncertainty of life on the ranch. And with Wyatt, I was no longer an analyst. I was a participant. But the 6-month clock was ticking. The banks were watching, and the new capital was burning fast. We had implemented the structure, but now came the true test. Results. We needed a major win, and fast. We need to launch the brand immediately, I decided, pushing away the romantic distraction. We need a launch event, something that generates buzz and gets us those high-profile restaurant contracts. A launch event? Wyatt looked dubious. Like a party? I haven't thrown a party since I was 18. Not a party, Wyatt. A strategic, high-impact branding event. We need to invite the best chefs in Texas here. We give them the story, the experience, and the taste of the beef. We bring the city to Willow Creek. His eyes lit up with the challenge. Bring the city to the ranch. I like it. But that means cleaning up this place. Eleanor. We need to grade the drive, fix the porch, and make the whole ranch look like the premium reserve it is. Then we start tomorrow, I declared, squeezing his hand. You handle the land, I handle the invitations. We prove that Willow Creek isn't just surviving, it's thriving. The sheer scale of the task was daunting, but for the first time I didn't feel overwhelmed. I felt ready. I had the best rancher in Texas, a viable business model, and a connection that was rapidly becoming the most important data point in my life. I looked at Wyatt, the man who had taught me that trust was more powerful than leverage. We have 3 weeks, I said. Let's show them what real partnership looks like. Narrator note to audience. Eleanor and Wyatt are finally working together and the chemistry is undeniable. Do you think their plan to save Willow Creek will succeed? Hit that like button and subscribe for the thrilling conclusion in part 4. Let me know in the comments, what are you hoping to see at the big launch event? The next 3 weeks were a blur of organized chaos. I had traded my structured calendar for a dynamic project management schedule that relied heavily on human effort and the unpredictable nature of the land. My suit remained in the guest room closet, a silent relic. I wore the flannel shirt and jeans every day, and my hands, though still prone to blisters, were becoming stronger, the skin toughened by manual labor. Wyatt and I were a formidable team. I managed the logistics, ordering professional lighting, coordinating catering, which focused entirely on his beef, of course, designing sleek menus, and sending personalized invitations to the top 20 chefs and restaurateurs in the state. Wyatt managed the physical transformation, grading the drive, repairing the porch, and ensuring the entire property looked not just functional, but beautiful, the perfect backdrop for the narrative we were selling. Learned to drive the battered pickup truck, hauling supplies from the nearest town 40 miles away. I learned the difference between an Angus and a Hereford, and how to read the subtle signs of a healthy pasture. I was constantly covered in a fine layer of dust, but I had never felt cleaner. Our relationship deepened under the pressure. We argued fiercely over budgets and aesthetics. He wanted a rustic, hand-painted sign. I demanded a professionally designed, laser-cut logo. but we always found a compromise rooted in mutual respect. The late nights, fueled by strong coffee and the shared adrenaline of the looming deadline, often ended with silent, comforting touches, or a deep, lingering kiss under the vast, indifferent stars. I stopped thinking of him as a client and started thinking of him as mine. 3 days before the event, disaster struck, the kind of non-quantifiable risk I had failed to account for in any model. I was finishing the seating chart when Wyatt burst into the house, his face grim. "Eleanor, we have a problem, a big one." "What is it? Did the linens arrive stained? Did the new irrigation system fail?" I asked, immediately jumping into crisis mode. "Worse. The weather forecast changed. They're predicting a severe cold front moving in tonight. A flash freeze. 20 degrees in the next 12 hours. It's too early in the season for this." My mind immediately went to the spreadsheets. How many head are still in the North pasture? We need to calculate the exposure and potential loss based on age and health profile. "Forget the calculations," Wyatt snapped, the urgency in his voice cutting through my logic. "We have 80 calves up there, and they can't handle this cold without shelter. They won't survive the night. We need to move the entire herd into the main barn now." "But that's hours of work. We're running on fumes, Wyatt, and we have the event preparations to finalize." "The event is meaningless if we lose the product." He grabbed his heavy leather jacket. "This isn't about profit, Eleanor. This is about life. We move the herd now. I need you to ride Star and help me push them down to the valley." My heart hammered against my ribs. I had only been riding for 2 weeks. I was competent at a slow trot, but moving 80 semi-wild animals across dark, uneven terrain in freezing weather was far beyond my skill set. "Wyatt, I can't herd cattle. I'll be a liability." "You're the only help I have. Put on every layer you own. And Eleanor, listen to Star. She knows the land better than either of us right now. Trust your instinct." I pulled on layers of borrowed thermal gear, the heavy boots, and the straw hat. The air outside was already biting cold, carrying the metallic scent of impending snow. We rode out into the gathering twilight. Wyatt was magnificent on his gelding, his confidence radiating even in the low light. He gave me quick, sharp instructions, teaching me how to use my voice and Star's presence to gently guide the herd, not frighten them. The next 4 hours were the hardest, most terrifying work of my life. The cold was brutal, seeping into my bones. The calves were stubborn, the terrain treacherous, and the darkness absolute. My mind, usually so clear and structured, was overwhelmed by sensory input. The lowing of the cattle, the creak of the saddle leather, the biting wind, and the sound of Wyatt's voice, calm and steady, guiding me through the darkness. I made mistakes. I pushed too hard once, and a group of calves scattered, forcing Wyatt to ride hard to retrieve them. When he returned, his face was tight with worry and exhaustion. "Patience, Eleanor. You're still fighting them. You have to move around the edges, not straight through the middle. Predict the flow." Predict the flow. It was the same principle I used to predict market movements, but applied to living, breathing organisms. I focused, pushing away the panic, listening to the rhythm of Star's hooves and the breath of the animals. I found the rhythm. I stopped fighting the chaos and started riding the edge of it. I moved with the herd, not against it, nudging the stragglers, gently asserting my presence. By 2:00 a.m., the last of the calves were safely tucked into the main barn. The flash freeze hit minutes later, turning the ranch into a sheet of ice. We dismounted, shivering uncontrollably, our bodies aching from the cold and the strain. I leaned against Star, burying my face in her mane, completely spent. Wyatt walked over and simply wrapped me in his arms, pulling me tight against his chest. His body heat was a sudden, overwhelming relief. "We did it," he whispered into my hair. "We saved them all. You were incredible, Eleanor." I clung to him, tears of exhaustion and relief freezing on my cheeks. "I trusted the instinct," I murmured. "I listened to the herd." "See," he said, kissing the top of my head. "You're a rancher now, Vance. No spreadsheets required." We stumbled back to the house, too tired for conversation, too connected for distance. We shed our frozen outer layers in the mudroom and walked straight to the guest room. He didn't leave. He pulled me onto the bed, boots and all, and simply held me close under the heavy quilt. It wasn't about passion, it was about survival, warmth, and the profound intimacy of shared struggle. I fell asleep instantly, wrapped in the knowledge that I had chosen life over logic, and won. The launch event 2 days later was flawless. The ranch, despite the recent freeze, was spectacular. The graded drive was smooth, the fences were tight, and the main pasture was dotted with healthy cattle. The barn, where we hosted the tasting, was lit with warm, professional lighting that highlighted the aged wood and the scent of hay and leather. I was back in my armor, a beautifully tailored, deep burgundy suit that was the perfect contrast to the rustic setting. But this time, the suit didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a uniform for the new command I was taking. The chefs arrived, their skepticism palpable. They were accustomed to sterile, corporate presentations. They were not accustomed to being served aged ribeye by the man who had raised the steer, standing next to the woman who had restructured the operation. I gave the first part of the pitch, the financial rigor. I presented the projected profit margins, the logistical efficiency I had built, and the guarantee of supply. I was sharp, professional, and convincing. Then I ceded the floor to Wyatt. He wasn't wearing a suit. He wore clean, dark denim, a pressed white shirt, and a simple leather vest. He didn't use a PowerPoint slide. He simply talked. He talked about the land, the dedication, the way he raised the cattle on grass alone, the genetics, and the commitment to sustainable, ethical farming. He talked about the history of Willow Creek, not as a ledger entry, but as a commitment passed down through generations. He spoke with a quiet, undeniable passion that captivated the room. He held up a perfectly marbled steak. "You can quantify the flavor, the texture, the yield," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "But you can't quantify the care. You can't put a number on the heart we put into this beef. That, gentlemen, is the premium reserve." The chefs were sold. They didn't just like the product, they loved the story. By the time the final chef had left, we had secured 5 major contracts and enough pre-orders to stabilize the ranch for the next year. Willow Creek was not just saved, it was positioned for explosive growth. We stood alone in the main barn, the smell of wood smoke and success heavy in the air. I looked at the order sheets, then at Wyatt. "We did it," I repeated, the phrase carrying a much deeper meaning than before. "We did," he smiled, walking toward me. He didn't stop until he was standing directly in front of me, his height commanding. He reached out and gently touched the lapel of my expensive suit. "The suit looks good, Eleanor, but I prefer the flannel." "The flannel is better for chasing cows in the dark," I agreed, my gaze locked on his. He took my hands, his rough palms enveloping mine. "The 6 months are secured, Eleanor. The banks are happy. You've fulfilled your contract, and then some. What happens now?" The question wasn't about the ranch, it was about us. The corporate world was calling, the pinnacle of my career waiting for my return. I had a life of air conditioning, high thread counts, and predictable logic waiting for me. I looked around the barn at the place where I had learned to trust instinct, where I had felt the thrill of shared survival, and where I had discovered a connection that dwarfed any financial achievement. "I called the firm this morning," I confessed, my voice steady. "I resigned." Wyatt's eyes widened, a slow, beautiful realization spreading across his face. You resigned? Eleanor, that was your life." "It was a life built on numbers that never added up to happiness," I explained, letting go of his hands to touch his cheek. "My new life is built here. It's messy, it's chaotic, and it's entirely real. I'm not leaving, Wyatt." "But what will you do?" "I'm your partner," I stated simply. "I'm taking the 6-month operational contract and making it permanent. We have a company to build, a brand to launch nationally, and an entire ranch to manage. I handle the ledger, you handle the land. We're a team." He laughed, a sound of pure, unadulterated joy, and pulled me tight against his chest, suit and all. I love the way you calculate risk, Eleanor Vance, he murmured against my hair. It wasn't a risk, I corrected, pulling back just enough to look at him, my heart overflowing. It was the only logical choice. I chose the unquantifiable metric of soul, Wyatt, and my analysis shows the long-term ROI is astronomical. He kissed me then, a deep, celebratory kiss that sealed the partnership, business and personal, forever. I think, he whispered, resting his forehead against mine, you should trade that suit for the flannel one last time. It's cold and I want to watch the stars with my partner. I think that's a highly effective proposal, Rancher Thorne, I agreed, pulling him toward the house. I never returned to the city. My life became the rhythm of the ranch, the dawn rides, the smell of hay and leather, the relentless demands of the land, and the profound comfort of the man who had taught me that the truest measure of success isn't in what you conquer, but what you choose to nurture. I found my strength in the soil and my home in his arms. The spreadsheets were still essential, but now they were guided by the heart. Thank you so much for following Eleanor and Wyatt's journey from the boardroom to the barn. If you enjoyed this story of logic meeting passion, please let me know in the comments. What city are you listening from? And how would you rate this story overall from 0 to 10? Your feedback helps the channel grow.